All right, got a follow up from my question on tongue speaking, and that is it possible that people today who say they can speak in tongues, the reason they're not languages like you and I know, actual dialects, is it possible that they're called heavenly language or tongues of angels, as Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse number 1? That's a good question, and let's look at it right quick. If you have your Bibles and you want to turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1, let's look at it together. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. So it is true, Paul makes reference here to the tongues of men and the tongues of angels. Now, the question you may have for me and I may have for you is, what are tongues of angels? I have no clue, first of all. And I don't think anybody can know what exactly Paul is referring to right here, tongues of angels. If you just had to take what the Bible teaches about angels, everywhere in the Bible where I see angels communicating, they're speaking in human dialect. I don't care who it is. You know, the angels that approach Abraham in Genesis 18, they were talking in human language. The angels that approached Lot at Sodom and Gomorrah were talking in human language. Even God, when he spoke from heaven, a lot of times when he talked to people, he was talking in a human dialect. So in order for someone to change the tongues of angels to some speech that's unintelligible, there has to be some type of clue from that for that somewhere in the Bible. I don't find any clue anywhere that tongues of angels is talking about languages that are unintelligible or something that is not a human dialect. Okay, but for the sake of illustration, let's assume that there are two different types of languages. Let's assume that there's a language of man and there is a language of angels. Let's assume that's the case. Even if that is the case, we cannot violate 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and let me show you what I mean by that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, he's talking about tongue speaking. He is talking about prophesying, and he's comparing the two together. And he's talking about how prophesying actually benefits people because you're speaking in something, you're speaking in a way where people can understand. But if you're speaking in tongues and people can't understand you, it does not benefit them. So what he says in verse 23, 1 Corinthians 14, 23, if the whole church comes together in one place and they're all speaking with tongues, and there comes somebody in who's uninformed or an unbeliever, will they not say you're out of your mind? What his point is this right here. If somebody comes into your church services and you're up speaking some language or some gibberish that they cannot understand, they're going to think you're out of your mind. They're going to think that you people are crazy. This is what Paul is saying. He said they're going to think you all are crazy. And so to keep people from thinking that we're crazy, he jumps on down to verse number 27 and he says this. If anybody speaks in a tongue, let it be two or at the most three. And in turn, let someone interpret it. Why do you need someone to interpret the tongue? So people listening won't think you're crazy. But in verse number 28, if there is no interpreter, let him keep silent in the church and let him speak to himself and to God. I don't care if you're speaking in the tongue of a man. If there's nobody to interpret what you're saying, God said, be quiet. If you're speaking in the tongue of an angel, if there's no one there to interpret what you're saying, God said, be quiet and speak to yourself and talk to me. So it doesn't really matter what language a person said they're speaking. We still have to do it the way God said. I personally don't believe that people could speak in tongues in a miraculous way like they did in the first century. When we speak in tongues today, is something that we attain through education, through learning a different language. But by all means, if you can show me somewhere in the Bible where God tells us to speak in a heavenly language or a language of an angel, and then he gives us permission that we don't need an interpreter for that, I could have missed it. I could have missed it. Just let me know and I'd be more than willing to look at it. God bless you.